In today's video, we're going to be doing one of my favorite projects, and that's installing air conditioning. Now here at my new place in New Hampshire, this house is 30 years old, didn't have central air or anything else. So I'm going to use the same system that I put in my other house because it had worked so well in the past. This is a Mr. Cool split ductless AC. And you might be thinking that there's no way you could do this job yourself, but it's surprisingly easy. Mr. Cool changed everything because they engineered this system so that a DIYer could put it in themselves. You need to consider where you're going to put the inside unit and then the outside unit because they do need to connect with a series of hoses. But here in this room, it's the hottest room in my house above the garage, and I'm going to place the unit in the corner. Now this thing has electric louvers, so it will circulate the air around the room. Now fortunately, they've made it really DIY friendly. They include that cardboard template. You just put it on the wall, and then you're going to make one hole through the wall of your house. Now this is where all the hoses are going to go that will do the cooling and the electrical. Now my kit, they even included this hole saw, so it made the job really easy. First I went through the drywall, then I like to use this extension bit, and this was not part of the kit. This is going to be a pilot hole on the outside, because if it just went through both sections of the wall with that saw, it might kind of blow out the shingles when it went through. Now I'll cut that same hole from the outside in, and this hole is really the hardest part of this installation, and it really wasn't that difficult. And now that it's made, we've got to go grab the bracket. And a lot of people go nuts trying to figure out where the bracket is, but Mr. Cool already installed it on the back of the air handler. So to remove it, you do have to take this one Phillips head screw off. Now that's just there for packing, you're not going to need it after the installation. Now before you hang that bracket on the wall, you want to double check it with the template, because the only thing that matters is the relation of the template to the hole you made. So just put the cardboard template on the wall and mark where that bracket should go, and now you can get rid of it and put the bracket on the wall and just level things out. Now they've put a million holes in this thing, but sometimes it's not going to line up with a stud. So in my case, I actually had to drill a couple of holes in it just to get as many studs into it as possible. You really only need 4 screws, but I went ahead and put 6 of them in and leveled everything out, and now this bracket was ready to go. Now I'm ready to mount the air handler to the wall, but before I do that, I've got to uncoil this electric wire, and then these hoses are inside the back of the unit, but we've got to actually bend these out straight because all of these items are going to go right through the wall. Those 2 bigger lines are actually where the refrigerant is in, and that's going to provide the cooling. But you can see the small white hose with that little nipple on the end, and that's actually going to allow the water to drain out of the unit. That's why oftentimes under an air conditioner you see water dripping. This hose will safely carry it away outside your house. Now this part is really important because sometimes your installation is not going to be that easy. This light kept banging into me, it was driving me nuts, so I grabbed a tie down to pull it out of the way. The other problem is I've got a stairwell to the side of me, so I had to stand in a ladder and kind of balance this thing on my head to get it in position. So if I can do it this way by myself, you can definitely do this job yourself, especially if you've got a little bit of help. And this bracket design is really good. You hook on the top of the air handler, and then the bottom part snaps into position. And when you're done, your air handler is mounted and you're ready to move on to the next step. This is the first time I've installed one of these Mr. Cools on a second floor, so I had to break out the ladder, and this is going to add a little bit more time to the job. Directions tell you to uncoil these lines. Now you want to be careful with them because you don't want to kink them or damage them in any way, but I found it was easier to kind of step on one end and just carefully unroll the coil. Once you've done that, you just need to connect the 2 lines together. Now you can't really mess this up because they only fit one way, so you need to remove these dust caps that are blue and gray, and then just carefully screw the lines together. You may actually hear a hissing noise, and that is the refrigerant inside. That's because this entire system is pre-charged with refrigerant. You don't need to vacuum out the lines or add anything to the system. Now it's important to use 2 wrenches here, and I'll show you a close-up of this more later because you don't want to twist the lines. Now I need to find a place to mount the outside condenser. Now Mr. Cool has 2 options. You can either wall mount it or put it on the ground. Now in my old house I did a wall mounting and it worked out great, but here I've got to repaint the outside of this house, so I decided to mount it on the ground, and I could actually put it on the bracket later. So once I get that base in place and you want to make sure everything's solid, you can go ahead and put the condenser in position. Now I just need to connect up the other end of the refrigerant lines. Now they are easy to do, but you want to be careful. These things have some fine thread, so you're going to start by removing both of these caps, and then you want to hand thread them into position. The reason you're doing this first is you don't want to cross thread anything, but once they get tight, you can go ahead and use a wrench to tighten them up, and as they start to get snug, definitely go ahead and use that second wrench so that nothing in the line gets twisted. But now you're ready for the best part. Go ahead and remove these 2 caps on each line, and you're going to notice inside is this kind of Allen nut, and they include a tool right in the box. Insert the key all the way in. And when you give it a turn, listen.
That was just the sound of the refrigerant basically being connected through the entire system.
And you're going to loosen this all the way to the end. Don't force it. And once it hits the end, just leave it there. And then you're going to go ahead and do the other one and then replace the cap. What you've seen right here is what makes these Mr. Cools so unique. It's the only system on the market that has these pre-charged lines and a condenser. Before the next step, you're going to want to go ahead and make sure that you seal up the hole. You can see it's a lot bigger than you need, and I'm going to use expanding foam. They do give you some kind of putty in the box, but I didn't find that to be really useful. You could also use silicone or something else, but you want to make sure it's totally sealed up and weather tight. And don't worry at all about this mess right here, because every part of this is going to be covered. I want to install these pads they include. They call these things sound deadening pads, and they're kind of like tar, but you wrap them around each of those brass connections, and apparently it somehow keeps it quieter so that you don't get any kind of buzzing. Next, Mr. Cool sells this trim kit, and you're definitely going to want this because looking at those hoses and wires isn't really a good thing. But this is really simple. Just a plastic track that you screw behind the hoses, and then they give you the trim pieces that go over the front of it, and it covers everything up. Now if you're happy with the white, that's fine, but this stuff is also paintable to match your house. Now you don't run it all the way down the hoses, you just want to get the trim kit below the actual condenser. At this point, it's a good idea to check the level of the outside condenser, make sure that nothing's too crazy, but this part looks fine, so I'm going to move on to doing the electrical. This is our outside electrical connection. It's called an AC service disconnect, and it's exactly that. Anytime you work in the system, you can flip this breaker and the power is cut off. This is also a connection point for how you can do your wiring. Now I recommend that you get an electrician to do the outside portion, but they're going to leave you with this thing called a whip. And this whip is going to be connected to the Mr. Cool system itself. And you'll notice you've got two holes. One of them is going to be for that black connection cable that came from the inside air handler, and the other one is going to go to that AC service disconnect. I'm going to start with wiring up the Mr. Cool connections, and those are easy. Each one of those wires is labeled with a number. Do not follow the colors. You can see there's a 1, 2, and a 3, and I'm just matching them in position. Now we need to connect the lines from the service disconnect. Now these might be different depending on what your electrician installs, but you can see here I've got a red, black, and a green. Those are both hot because this connection is 240 volt. There's no neutral on this line. So I'm going to connect each of these to the two connections on the inside of the Mr. Cool that are labeled L1 and 2. Those are for line 1 and line 2. And then finally, I'm going to use the green, and that's for the ground. One thing that's a pain on all these split ductless is once you have everything wired up, it's kind of a bear to close this cover up because you've got the pressure of the wires kind of pushing on you. So just kind of finagle them, and eventually you get that cover closed. But before I turn it on, I am going to install this little USB key. This is the part that makes this system smart. Once you plug it inside the unit's cover, this thing can connect to Wi-Fi, and you can turn this system on from anywhere. Now I want to finish up these small items. I'm going to put the courtesy cover over the refrigerant lines, and I'm going to screw that in position. I also got some clamps to tie that AC whip against the house, just to keep everything secure. Looking a lot better. I've just got to make that final piece for the bottom of the trim kit, so I've got to make a couple of cuts, and again this stuff cuts really easily. I'll screw it in a position, snap on the final cover, and now your eyes don't see it because the cover goes below the outside condenser. You also notice on the back of the condenser you can see that small white hose. That's your condensate hose, so that's where the water is going to run out of the unit. You want to make sure that that's above ground and that nothing is blocking it. The directions also recommend that you put that hose kind of to the back, so you want to keep that to the back of the channel so that the water can freely run out. With everything complete, we're ready to turn the power on and check the system out. This is the fourth Mr. Cool unit I've installed, and this one is definitely good. They've made some small improvements, the remote control is nicer, but as soon as I hit the power button, this thing immediately turned on. You can see these louvers are electric, so even though this is in the far corner of my room, this will have no problem at all circulating that air-conditioned air everywhere I need it. Working by myself, I spent about 6 hours doing the installation in total, and I spread it over 2 days, partially because it started to rain. But when it's done, you are going to be happy. You've got air conditioning that is absolutely unbelievable. It is super quiet, and it also doesn't use a lot of energy.
So this thing is running pretty much max speed right now. It is quiet. I'm 5 feet in front of it. I'm probably 20 feet. I can't even hear the central air from here. Barely.
This Mr. Cool was an 18,000 BTU system. They got calculators online to help you size them, but you can do your entire house with a unit as big as 36,000 BTUs.